Okay, welcome to Kill the Lizard. This is a podcast about messy middles. We're scapegoating the lizard brain as kind of the cause of all the world's problems. We don't want you to kill lizards or even kill your lizard brain or lizard people. We're just sort of pointing out this part of your brain that's responsible for fear and is maybe something to be examined. I'm someone who's been in messy middles, I feel like, my whole life. We own a creative agency called the Alchemy Agency. I've always found myself a little bit torn about what I do because I love making stuff. But when you learn about the impact of developing products and mass producing them, you kind of find out that the thing you love to do, which is create things, is also sort of part of the problem. You know, it's filling up the seas with garbage and your balls with microplastics, if you have those. I always find myself torn, and there's a part of me that says, oh, why don't you just quit and go, work on a farm in Alaska? And so I figured maybe we could start a place to talk about these messy middles. Maybe you had to overcome something, or you work for something that maybe you don't agree with, or, for example, we make stuff on social media. Social media can be a toxic place. Just the very act of making something that is designed to get eyes means we're pulling people into it. At the same time, if you want to raise awareness about your thing, you kind of got to play the game. And so it's messy middles like that. It's failing. I think I've failed at more things than most people have started. I'm not sure if that's bragging, but I think it's true. And it sucked every time. I have anxiety, ADHD for sure, probably some other stuff. And some of the things I've investigated to help are like spiritual paths, psychedelics, and also just traditional psychotherapy. Found out that improv is probably one of the best things I've done. And so we're going to talk to people in all of those spaces on this podcast too. We've talked to everyone from the COO of IDEO to influencers to Micah, who we're going to talk to first on the podcast, who sort of escaped a cult in her own words and was nursing and found out that that wasn't really her passion and switched to psychedelic healing modalities and built a business through that. So I hope that explains something. If you're still here, that's Kill the Lizard. That's what this is. We'll talk more. All right, so let's kick it off with Micah. And thank you. Yes, thank you.
Obviously birth and coming up in a cult and being raised as a gay little skater girl in this very religious cult, developing a lot of self-hatred, self-rejection, having been in the environment that I was in, I really feel like there was no way to like accept who I was being in the environment that I was in, because it was constantly shoved down my throat that everything about me was like wrong, So I was this gay little skater girl, felt like I was like kind of the black sheep of the environment that I was raised in, a very conservative, religious environment in Kentucky. And, dealt with a lot of depression myself that I don't think I really understood was what it was until later in life. I finally came out of that environment when I was about 22 or 23, and I came out of the closet, kind of had this huge like weight lifted off of me, I think from holding in just a lot of rejection of myself for so long, and began to explore other spiritual modalities, things like meditation and self-inquiry in a different way. And I can honestly say, I think my first like psychedelic-esque experience was in meditation before I had ever touched psychedelics. There was a time I was meditating in my closet, and I was fairly new to the practice, and I was listening to this song or chant. I'm not really sure what to call it, but it's basically like the same chant over and over again. It's called the Devi prayer for anybody that wants to look into it. And I think the full version is about like 40-ish minutes long, and it's literally just kind of the same chant over and over for 40 minutes. Correct. So at one point you were just like deep in it because you were just sucked into this beautiful like orchestrated chant. And I'm probably maybe 15 or 20 minutes in. I don't know. I had no concept of time, but I'm deep into the meditation, deep for me for sure. And all of a sudden I feel myself like getting kind of like pulled out of my body, or like I feel like I'm almost I'm in this dark closet. So I feel like I go from like in my body to like in the dark closet overseeing my body to over my house to out of the planet to like out of existence. And all of a sudden, I feel like I have this bird's eye view over everything, like over time, over existence, over the universe. Like I feel like I was just given this bird's eye view being sucked out of my body. And I felt so similar to how I did when I was talking about the first mushroom trip that I had, where I just felt connected to everything. Like it was this profound experiential insight that I am not my body. I felt that first before touching psychedelics in this meditation, where
Wow.
it was this deep, like, understanding that there's something going on way bigger than me, way bigger than this meat suit that I'm in, way bigger than the religious environment that I grew up in, way bigger than any sort of worldview or belief system, way bigger than like any past or trauma or family system, like just so much bigger than any of it. And I truly think that was like a huge part of my story was like experiencing that and beginning to kind of shape my worldview around that understanding that I am so much more than that. And not just because it wasn't like, oh, I feel like I know this now. It was like, no, I have experienced this. Like for some reason, I think that's one of the beautiful things about the use of psychedelics. Sometimes things that are knowledge through these experiences turn into knowing. It's
Hmm.
not knowledge, it is deep knowing through experience. And I had that, and that shaped me in a lot of ways. There's a lot I could go into about the religious environment I was raised in, but that's certainly one of the things that I think changed me and gave me kind of, it was like a door opened to be like, here's another way of looking at the world.
Right, right. They didn't mention this in the cult. Where did this
Not
come
at
from?
all.
Yeah,
Not,
yeah,
not at all.
yeah.
And I began to use psychedelics. First, I started using psychedelics mostly just for fun. Shortly after that, I started going a little bit more introspective. You know, it was fun and lighthearted. And then I went into a deeper understanding that I am connected to everything. Like, I am not just encapsulated in this flesh suit, I am so much more than that. And I'm truly connected to everything. And so that was kind of a huge, profound insight. It sounds really simple, but I think it was more of a feeling experientially than like a knowledge that came to me. I think it's something that I knew, but something I never quite experienced like that. And so shortly after, I really developed somewhat of an intrigue to psychedelics. And at the time, I was working as a nurse, and every day was just getting harder and harder for me to show up. I was super discouraged with the fact that healthcare is essentially just a pharmaceutical driven profit business model. And I really didn't feel good about that anymore. I didn't feel good about participating in that system. I didn't feel good about the way that as medical providers we show up for patients. I felt like it had just turned into handing out pills like candy rather than helping people create true transformation through lifestyle changes, more holistic modalities, understanding nutrition, understanding things that you don't have to be reliant on for the rest of your life to like be better. And I think the reality is, as medical providers, we're not truly trained in those modalities. So I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the individual as much as the system as a whole is just set up to be really profit driven for these pharmaceutical companies. And I began to catch on to that. I began to really begin to feel into that. And I was really discouraged by it, really misaligned in it. And so I decided to leave. I decided to leave healthcare and start my own coaching company, Transform with Micah. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm working with people in one-on-one settings and in group programs to use the tool of microdosing and deep transformational mindset work to actually create sustainable change in their lives.
Because I think for me, it resonates, and I think for a lot of people, and that's kind of what this show's about, this business and consciousness, where you have to do a job, like you got to
Yeah.
make money. And a lot of people are stuck in this cycle of like, I don't know, I went to college, I'm in student debt, I have to do this job. Like I
Yeah.
gotta, whether
Yeah.
it's my parents' expectations. I feel that a lot where sometimes I'm burnt out and I just want to jump ship,
Yeah.
but sometimes riding that wave and getting through that storm is actually what I need.
Yeah.
So you never know. But when you tell your story about you knew you were misaligned and you jumped and you started this thing, like I'm sure that was a lot harder than that quick transition, like the story to like then to
Yeah.
now. How did you
Oh,
get like the
absolutely.
courage to do that, and like what really, like how did you get yourself from I'm stuck to now I'm really fully aligned?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. To me, I hold to following joy over certainty, which I think being in other places in my life where I've had to do that, like when I left my environment, when I left that cult that was really, I mean, that was all I knew for the first like 22, 23 years of my life was growing up in that environment. And I truly like didn't have, looking back, I like didn't have a ton of interaction with like the outside where I did, like I went to public school and everything, but it was kind of encouraged that we most of our focus goes towards the group and like just having friends in the group and not really encountering a lot of things outside it, because God forbid we slip into sin by like encountering outsiders. And so
Yeah.
I think like a lot of it was somewhat of a like, I guess a lot of it was me realizing I can't follow the things I know to be safe over the things I know to that will bring me to life. And when I came out of that environment, that felt like leaving something that was comfortable and familiar and safe to me. When I came out of the closet, that also felt like leaving something that was comfortable and familiar and safe to me, and putting myself almost in like the line of danger. Like it was almost like I'm opening myself up to threat, and the same thing in my career. I think I had to look back on other times that I had done that and it worked out for my good and say, I know this is going to be the same way. Like, I know that if I follow joy over certainty, that following my alignment will work out and things just coming into my path that are meant to. I really also hold to the idea that the things that are meant for us will find us if we follow our own alignment and if we follow joy. But when we're following certainty or we're driven by fear, those things don't get to find us because we're not on the path. So I think that was a huge part for me, was having to remember other times that served as evidence that when I do this, it works out.
That makes a lot of sense. So, how did you know that it was psychedelics? And is psychedelic therapy the right way to describe what you do?
Well, I'm not a licensed therapist, and I will say that off the bat. What I do is I call it life coaching and microdosing mentorship. So, not every client of mine engages in microdosing or the use of psychedelics. I also do deeper mindset work with people who don't have any interest in that, and that's fine too. But coaching is kind of primarily what I do. And I love to integrate psychedelics into that when it feels supportive, when it feels aligned, when it feels right for the client.
Okay, so background as a nurse helped, and was it? I know that I want to do this. I know that I want to develop this sort of program. I want to be a coach. I want to use microdosing. Was it crystal clear at that moment when you took the leap?
No, not at all, actually. To be honest, I always tell people clarity comes with taking action. If you take action, the clarity will come. So for me, I just had to start taking action. Like, I had to be open to the possibility of doing something other than nursing. And as I did so, I think the clarity began to come. But how I started, I originally went into a program that was teaching nurses how to leverage their skills as nurses to begin their own holistic health coaching practice. So I actually thought originally that I was going to be going into holistic health coaching. Quickly learned that that's not what I do. Every time I was engaging with someone in these one-on-one coaching containers and they brought up some sort of health related goal to me, every time what we ended up talking about was mindset. And so I realized I don't think I'm a health coach, even though it was like also helping them make steps towards their physical health related goals. what brought me to life, what I felt most aligned with, was the mindset underneath. And so a lot of the coaching that I do is actually deeper mindset coaching. But again, like that clarity didn't come until I was like taking steps and taking action and getting into these coaching containers. And then I really started thinking to myself, like, what are my biggest passions? Like, what have been the things that have been pivotal for me in my own journey, my own transformation? And how might I bring those into my coaching containers? And for a bit, it was a little bit, I didn't know how to approach it. We're in a weird kind of stage in the development of psychedelics in the mental health space where a lot of it is not legalized yet. There are places that have decriminalized these things, and there are even some places that have legalized them. But for me, it's always been hard to know, like, how can I incorporate this and with where we're at in the legalization of some of these things. So at first I was reluctant. And then I was like, let me bring on some lawyers. Let's see what they think. And let's figure out ways that I can go about this in a way that has some protection, but I don't feel like I'm not getting to do what I really feel called to do right now.
Can we talk a little bit about maybe the legalities, but also the findings? Because I think it's kind of out there in like the zeitgeist that, oh, okay, psychedelics are cool now, and like they're finding that it works for mental health. But do people really know, compared to typical antidepressants or anti-anxiety?
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's getting out there, and that makes me happy to see. I think also the more that it does come into the public eye, the more it pushes for different changes from researchers and also for people that are in charge of creating things like legislation and what gets legalized and what gets decriminalized and things like that. When nobody cares about something, that's not going to be something that's addressed. But the more people care and are saying like, hey, we really want you to explore this, we really want you to look into kind of the benefits that we're seeing here, then all of a sudden you start to see kind of some subtle changes over time. And I think people are waking up to, and maybe it's because, it started out with more recreational use. It's not like psychedelics are new. I mean, there was the whole wave in the 60s and 70s, and then so much propaganda got created around the, what was called harm or detriment of the use of psychedelics. I don't know if you ever saw that video of a guy who he's like, I just want you guys to be really clear that this is your brain. And he's holding up an egg and then he cracks it on a frying pan and throws it in. He's like, this is your brain on drugs. So there's a lot of propaganda like that, to feed people this narrative that your brain on these substances is going to be like a fried egg, which I don't even know what that means, but like, that's certainly not what happens. In fact, what we've seen is maybe just the opposite of that, that you actually create more connections, that you create new pathways, that you kind of begin to open yourself up to enhanced neuroplasticity, which is essentially just the term used for the brain's ability to adapt over time. So the brain's ability to actually make changes. So instead of frying your brain, what they actually do is kind of bring it to life in a lot of ways, which is really interesting. And I think the more that people are not only having that come into their lives experientially, but as there's more research coming out around that, I think we are starting to see some changes. There are states like Colorado that have legalized some of these things. And I think primarily because we are seeing such a benefit in the mental health space. Like, it is wild how depression and anxiety and PTSD have gone through the roof. There's a lot of reasons for that. And we could talk about, how our food is made and the toxins in our environment and how 90% of our serotonin is produced in our gut and our gut health is shit right now. Like, we could talk about all that. But what is really neat is that psychedelics, I think, are coming into the mainstream for reasons of like seeing the benefit in the mental health space and that being such a need right now in our society, and it being very clear that alternatives are just not working, like SSRIs and anti-anxieties. Even if they have a small benefit, it doesn't seem to outweigh the side effects that come with them. And I think people are really feeling that as well.
So I want to be fair because I know someone who has started pharmaceutical
Hmm.
anti-anxiety antidepressants and has noticed a big shift in a positive way. And
Yeah.
so I I'm definitely one to be like, yeah, fuck the system, like go psychedelics. But also I
Yeah.
want to be fair because I have seen that. But also to your point about the food we're eating, the damage to our gut, and also social media. We're all dopamine addicted. We're all anxious.
Yeah.
We're all stuck to our
Yeah.
computers.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the work from home helped or hurt because, or maybe it's a mixture of the two, but
Yeah.
it seems like we're bombarded from all directions to
Yeah.
kind of make us feel and
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
Yeah, I can appreciate the desire to be fair to you and not say like they don't work for anybody, because obviously that's not the case. There's nothing on the planet that doesn't work for anybody or that works for everybody. Like there's nothing that we can say that to. Each person's so individual, and also the like chemical composition of each brain is so drastically different. And so of course there are going to be people that SSRI, and I'm not anti medication. I just think that these pharmaceutical companies have such a hold on us
yeah,
that there aren't other options presented. And I want to be somebody that presents other options for those people that truly feel like I just have to be on this medication that makes me feel awful because there is no other way. Like, I want to be somebody that says, no, you don't. Like,
yeah,
there are other things that you can do. And I don't mean just taking a microdosing capsule and exchanging it with the same kind of pharmaceutical business model of just like,
right.
hey, take this and everything's going to be okay. Like, that's also not what I'm about.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. This before and after idea we talked about, because that feels like it
Yeah.
hits close to home to me and why, full disclosure, I've signed up for your experience and
Cool.
I saw I think it was an ad on Instagram and it hooked me and it's exactly where I am. And when you're talking about kind of these perspectives, and for me, I've been calling them programs that get
Yeah.
installed from
Yeah.
like 0 to 10, right? Like
Yeah.
every aspect of the way you see the world, we're seeing, right? And mind you, I'm not a licensed anything, but from what I've found
Licensed podcaster.
based on my research, my own personal research, it seems like your whole perspective is developed in this sort of your youth, and then from then on out, it's like, okay, program installed. Best of luck. Now go out into
Yeah.
this planet where everyone else has completely different programs, and we
Yeah.
can't see each other's programming, and so we're
Yeah.
just bouncing off of each other. And some people have programming that's advantageous in this current reality. Some people have programming that might be more sane, but very useless in maybe our contemporary society as it stands right now, without going
Yeah.
into too many rabbit holes. So um, that's where I've been. And I've been
Yeah.
trying to undo a lot of my programming, and I've hit it feels like it's two steps forward, one step back, where it's
Mm.
like you're kind of chipping away at it.
Yeah.
And I've been interested in this idea of psychedelics. And so what I want to do with you is a little before and after. And so we're going to do a part two to this.
Yes.
And we'll check in after the what was the last like 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Is it something like that?
You
Okay.
got it.
So if you're down, if I haven't offended anyone or destroyed our relationship in the next 6 weeks, um,
Already.
if I don't get
Man.
kicked out, yeah, and then we'll check back and we'll see. I can tell you that
Yeah.
right now, as just sort of like a comparative, uh, what's the word? Scientific
Like analysis.
analysis. Sure.
Yeah.
The where I
Or
generally
baseline.
operate baseline. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Thank
There
you.
you go.
I generally operate anxious, right? Like,
Okay.
um, I, there's something called generalized anxiety disorder, which I have not been diagnosed with, but I do operate above. Just like I'm rarely chill. Like I really
Yeah.
got to work to find that like place of peace.
Yeah.
Um, and I would love to get to that place where the world that I'm looking outside feels like it's there for me and not a threat. You know, and I
Yeah.
think like Albert Einstein said something like the most important decision you can make is, do you live in a hostile or a loving universe? It's your
Mm,
choice. And I think
yeah.
I've been riding that line in betwixt, the two
Yeah.
for the last few years. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping to get out of it.
Yeah. I really believe that we are only motivated by like pursuing pleasure or avoiding pain. And it seems like part of the human condition is that the avoiding pain part overrules pursuing pleasure a lot of the time. And I want to help people receive the tools and integrate the tools and live into the tools that allow them to pursue pleasure over avoiding pain. Like, if I could kind of simplify some of the mindset work that I do, I think a lot of it comes down to that. Like, what would it look like? And I know we talked about this too. Like, what would it look like to grab fear by the hand and say, I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you, I'm not trying to change you, but we're going to do this. Like, we got this. And I'm going to walk with you through it. I like to help people get to know the fear a little bit. And that's why I even asked, when you're talking about this anxiety, like, have you gotten to know it at all?
Mm.
Because sometimes when we just spend a little time with it, we realize, like, oh, that's what you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to protect me from. That's how you're showing up.
Right.
And simply by understanding it, we can actually develop somewhat of a relationship to it where we can kind of be in the driver's seat rather than the emotion itself and say, hey, I'm going to take over from here. I appreciate that you're here, but you're just like crashing us into everything left and right. And so instead of like, and again, like oftentimes these things are formed really early in life. And if you think about a 4-year old or 6-year old kid driving your
Right.
bus, it's going to be chaotic for sure. But if you think about saying, hey, it's okay that you're here, but you have to be in the passenger seat. Like, I'm going to take over and allow us to actually get to where we're headed without running over 1,000 people and running into signs and going off the road or
Yeah.
off the rails. So I like to think of the mindset work as just kind of spending some time with the emotions and getting to know them and understanding where they're coming from so that we can almost develop a line of communication there where we can say, I understand your fears. I understand what you're trying to protect me from. And here's how I'm going to take over and like set us up for success. I'm not going to, do anything crazy that's going to get us on the side of the road homeless, like oftentimes the fears that we have are that we're just going to like end up, I think they all tie back to death, actually. I think every fear that we have ties back to death in some way. Like if you're afraid of losing your job, really, it's that you're afraid of being homeless and ending up on the streets, but really that's afraid that you're not going to have food. And then that is really the fear that you're going to die. Like you're going to be without something that you really need to survive. And so I like to kind of imagine sitting across the table from whatever the emotion is and saying, I understand you, but here's why we're not going to die if we do this. Like just kind of breaking it down, like truly
Yeah.
teasing it out a little bit and saying, we're not going to die. And here's why. So let me take you by the hand and just take one step forward. And once we do that, and we evaluate, like, hey, are we still safe? Did we survive that one step? Yeah, we did. Okay, let's take another one, take another step with that fear, with that anxiety, and almost grabbing it by the hand and just walking with it like that. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your experience as well. I think it's one that most people can relate to, especially in our day and age. There's so much stimulation and so much like around us that's telling us all the reasons we should be afraid all the
Yeah.
time. I think especially with the news and media of like, here are all the like 8 trillion things that happened today that were awful in the world. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, well, if you're told all the 8 trillion things that happened just today that like killed all these people or wiped out this country, it's like, of course you're going to be in that state.
Right. Yeah.
I had to
We're all
remove some of that.
pissed off and terrified.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what did you say when we talked? You said, hold on, I wrote down. Fear is a vast ocean that's only 6 inches deep. I have that written on
Yeah.
my wall over there. You said
I
that.
love
And
it.
it's so true because it all just exists in these scenarios, but it's
Yeah.
not, it's not real. And I've never liked there's there's like an acronym, fear is false evidence appearing real. And it's
Mm,
like, no, that's bullshit because I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Maybe, but how does that help
yeah,
me right now?
yeah, yeah.
Um, I like your metaphor better. It seems a little more useful.
If we could see fear kind of like that, where it has a purpose, like it truly has a way of like at times pulling us out of things that we don't need to be headed towards. Like fear has been, I think, a part of our, it's an emotion that's allowed us to evolve as a species. It's allowed us to survive because we have an understanding of the things that could put us in danger or be a threat to us continuing on as a species. So in a lot of ways, it's been super helpful and like very relevant. And in other ways, it's not relevant and it's not helpful.
Mm,
And I think wisdom is the understanding of where it's relevant and where it's not, and being able to communicate when it's not relevant. Hey, you can sit down. You can sit this one out, okay? Because I'm gonna move forward. So I
right.
think like in a lot of ways it makes sense to have somewhat of a like resentful attitude towards fear because it does keep us from so much of the things that we truly want and desire. And in other ways, it keeps us from things that could really be damaging. And just understanding how to differentiate that, I think, is gold. Like I think that's where we can kind of develop that relationship. I like to say that thoughts are truly like trains. I know there's the phrase like I lost my train of thought. And I really actually like the idea that thoughts are like trains because if you think of a train, it's like so loud and so obnoxious as it's passing by.
Yeah.
And yet you can choose to like focus all your attention on that. And you can even choose to jump on that train and go wherever it's going if you so please. And then the other side of that is you can choose to let it be loud and let it be obnoxious for a second, to maybe like pause your conversation. And then as it passes, continue on, like revisit that conversation and say, okay, sorry about that. Anyways, yeah, so what were we saying? Like, if you really allow your thoughts to just be a thing that passes rather than attaching your entire identity to them, I think that changes everything. And so part of the program is about pattern disruption. It's about disrupting the patterns of our thoughts, disrupting the patterns in our emotional states, disrupting the patterns even in our habits, because I personally think we kind of get into this loop where we have a belief that leads to a set of thoughts and emotions, which leads to a set of decisions and actions, which lead to the results that we get. And until we really change the belief, we will continue to get the same results because that's where it really initiates. Like it starts at the beliefs, which lead to the thoughts and emotions that we have tied to it, which lead to the decisions and actions that we take and we make. And when we finally get to a place where, like, I'm going to change this core belief that I have to step into something entirely different, all of a sudden you have a different set of thoughts and emotions. You make different decisions, you take different actions, and you get different results.
And so have you seen psychedelics or something? Because that's easier said than done, right? You can't just change, even if you become
Yeah.
aware of that core belief. I think a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last year specifically is just figure, because you think you know what the core belief is, and then you find if you keep doing a little more shadow work, a little more inner child stuff, all
Yeah.
of the things, like, oh wait, it wasn't that. Oh, that was
Yeah.
the core. There's always one deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there's that work to be done, and then even just changing it is rough. Have you seen that psychedelics help make that change?
I have, yeah. And I think that again goes back to the idea that you're enhancing neuroplasticity. Like you are truly getting your brain into a state, it is more receptive to change. It is more receptive to creating new connections. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza and
Yeah,
his work.
for sure.
Yeah, something that he says a lot is neurons that fire together wire together. If you continue to think the same exact things, or if you continue to say in the same exact emotions, those wire together, like they get intertwined and they get locked in. And so using psychedelics as a way to start to kind of loosen the ways that those have really like bonded together and eventually maybe be able to disrupt them entirely. I'm not saying that happens in a 6-week period, but I certainly think it's the foundation to go off of, to be able to say, here are the tools that I can begin to implement as I'm loosening some of those bonds to and disrupting some of those patterns to create something new. And so again, like I don't think there's a silver bullet in any of this. Like I don't
Right.
think there's like some kind of quick fix. I think it's what is required is consistent, committed action, like just showing up and saying, I'm going to continue to bring my awareness to this. I'm going to continue to dig into it, to try to understand it more, to put in place the tools to create different thought patterns and emotional states and habits in my life.
And I want to be respectful of your time. So maybe we'll close on out with this question. And it
Yeah.
is kind of your experience. I mean, you talked about being born in a cult. I didn't dive too deep into that, but I'd love to hear more if you're willing to share.
Yeah.
In this experience of you sort of had this not overnight, but profound transformation of you have a very different perspective on the world now than you did then.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I'd love to hear just about where it was then and where it is now, and where do you see all of this going?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a drastic change. Yeah, I grew up in an environment where it was kind of like the narrative that our group was like the only group that understands right and wrong and what's going on in the world, and we're the only people that are going to heaven and everybody else is going to hell, which is why it's so important that we bring everybody into our group so that we can save them from the fiery pits of eternal damnation.
Yeah,
Which is like a really wild concept. And yet that is what I grew up with. And my worldview was very much limited. It was very narrow. It was very black and white. It was also, to be frank, very arrogant. Like there was a lot of arrogance in the environment that I grew up in, that like we know it all. Everybody else is like living in this fog and like needs to be brought into the light, and we can do that. We can save them. And a lot of people in that environment that, of course, like nobody in the environment believes it's, as intense as it is. And then when you leave, it's kind of like, 2020, where you're like, holy shit, that was insane. Like, what
right.
was that?
Yeah,
There's a lot I could get into about kind of the structure of that model and why it was so intense and manipulative and controlling, and kind of the whole authority in that system was kind of wild. You had to report to people and they kind of had to like oversee your every move. You couldn't date anyone outside of the environment. I had my schedule looked over, where like I had to turn in my schedule and basically have somebody look it over and say if I was making enough time for God that week. And I had to report to the people above me who I was in the process of converting, and I had to share names. And it was just like a wild environment to be developing a worldview in at a really young age, and there's a lot of pressure there too, like a lot of pressure to save the world. Like that's not a
yeah.
pressure that should be on anyone. And so to have that kind of from the time I was forming consciousness, I think really shaped me in a lot of ways. And I've had to do a lot of deconstruction. That's one of the things I actually really like going into with clients, is what I call religious deprogramming. I like that you use the term programming, because I do find that to be accurate. Like we just develop, it's almost like we take in this code and we just get
Yeah.
hardwired into it. And I think religion often does that in a really intense way, because it is demonstrated that there's so much on the line. Like your entire eternity and your soul
Right.
is on the line.
Yeah.
So it's like there's an intensity there.
Okay, Micah, thank you so much. This was fun and interesting, and I appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
doing this transformative experience with you. So we'll talk
Yeah, me
soon.
too. Thank you. This is really rad, and I appreciate you having me on.